Hey, good evening, everybody. It's Rodney here with another episode of Desert Island Nerds. This is my web chat show that I've been doing on Saturday evenings. We had our first episode last week with the amazing Brian Freisinger, who's actually in the Twitch chat. So, hi, Brian. And we're broadcasting on Twitch TV, on Twitch TV/Rodney418. We're broadcasting also on YouTube and on Facebook Live. Oh, X Studios just subscribed. Oh. And I have forgotten to mute myself on the Facebook page. There we go. All right, so I was getting. It's for you, those of you watching on. Well, loads of you watching on Facebook. Hi, Misha. Hi, Martin. Nice to see you guys. I can see the chat on Facebook, kind of more or less, but there's a lot of other things going on in the background. It's a lot easier for me to see the chat on Twitch, and Twitch also has much better quality. So if you've got a Twitch account, go watch it there. But if you're on Facebook, hey, welcome anyway. So tonight, as usual, how the show works is every episode I interview a geeky, nerdy, hero-y kind of person. And us nerdy people love our stuff. If you look around, this is my office. I've got my VR headset. I've got my keyboards, all my books and comic books and everything. We love our stuff. So this show is about nerdy people and their nerdy stuff. And tonight's guest is an amazing guy. He's a writer. He's written a lot of really interesting things. I'm going to start with one of the things he's responsible for that many of you may know. And if you know it, you'll be happy to see this trailer again. And if you don't know this movie, you definitely should, because it's absolutely frigging amazing.
I chose this life, and someday it's going to get me killed. But not today.
Lorraine Broughton, expert in intelligence collection and hand-to-hand combat.
Agent Gascoigne was killed last night. Did you know him?
Enough to say hello.
He had an atomic bomb of information. Find out who's hunting our operatives, and trust no one.
David Persons, your contact.
Welcome to Berlin. I'm David. Don't shoot. I've got your shoe.
It was me from the moment my feet touched the ground.
This was never part of the plan.
It was part of mine.
I've lost the target.
What do you know about this woman who's been following me?
You look like you need saving.
So you made contact with the French operative?
Obviously.
And yes, that was Atomic Blonde. And tonight with me is the guy who came up with Atomic Blonde, writer Antony Johnston. Hi, man. How's it going with you tonight?
It's going pretty well. How you doing, Rodney?
Excellent. Can everyone hear us tonight, by the way? Smarmy
Yeah,
Bleeble says, need to see this. No, you've never seen Atomic Blonde. Oh, my God. How can you watch this show and say you've never seen Atomic Blonde? Because Atomic Blonde is one of the greatest action movies of all time. No question. I love that frickin' movie so much. It's everything I always wanted James Bond to be, and it wasn't. You know, that I freaking love that movie. Smarmy Brevel says, I've been in school for too long. Clearly you've been in school for too long if you haven't seen Atomic Blonde. It is a freaking masterpiece. One of the top 10 best action movies, spy movies of all time.
And is also available on all good streaming platforms these days.
Yeah, I know.
Because it was in theaters like 2.5 years ago, so it's now on like every platform.
Yeah, but you still have to pay for it, which is really freaking annoying. But I actually paid for it last night. I watched it again last night and paid real money to you, man. Real, honest to God money. I mean, what am I doing? I never.
Except none of that money actually comes to me, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I got
my
flat fee, but no residuals. Oh well.
Oh well. You get our awe and adulation. So that actually originally came from a comic book you wrote, because you're a comic book writer you're an everything writer, really. So let's rewind back to the start. You're from Yorkshire? Is that right?
No.
Where are you from?
I live in the northwest of England now, but I'm originally from Birmingham in the Midlands.
Oh, from Birmingham. Oh, hi, DJ Shiza. Thank you for following. It's great to see you.
Yeah, I moved around a lot, which is why I have a weird accent, but I moved around a lot for work and what have you. But I'm from Birmingham originally.
I don't really hear the Brummie, but you're from Birmingham. That's why you're into heavy metal, right?
Exactly. Up Black Sabbath, you know. But like I say, I moved around loads. I went down to Bristol, then to Bath, then to London, then Slough. And now up here to the northwest. Right. So my accent's all over the shop. But yeah, I was in Birmingham I was born in Birmingham, and then I moved. Even then, as a young kid, I moved to a town called Redditch, just outside of Birmingham, where I was raised. And then as soon as I was old enough, moved back to Birmingham to get out of Redditch. Lived there for a few years, and then as I say, I was a graphic designer. So
you were a graphic designer? I thought you were always a writer.
No. I've always written. I started writing when I was a kid.
Right. I mean,
most writers do.
Writers are born, not made, right?
Yeah. Well, a little of both. A little of column A, a little of column B. But for a profession, I was originally a graphic designer, and I specialised in magazines. I worked for Future Publishing for some years.
What, doing 2000 AD or?
No. That's.
Future. That's. But didn't you work in 2000 AD as well?
No. I've never worked for 2000 AD.
You didn't. You're the only British comic book writer who's never worked for 2000 AD.
Especially comic writers my age. I know. Tell me about it. But no, I never worked for Tooth.
So that's why you're in Bath with Future Publishing.
That's right. Yes, exactly. I was the deputy art director and then promoted to art director of .NET magazine for several years.
Oh, so you're a tech head as well?
Yes, I've always been a bit of a nerd, and I've been online since 1993. So, going back in the days of Usenet and the like.
Mm-hmm. I remember it well.
And as I say, did that for some time, but was always writing in the background, in my spare time. And then finally, I moved to London to work on a DVD magazine, which got shut down in 2002. But by that time, I had started to get more regular work writing comics. And so they laid me off. I took my severance pay and decided to go freelance. And I've been a full-time writer ever since. So that's been going on 20 years.
Wow. So, writing professionally for 20 years, that's a hell of an accomplishment for most writers. Most writers can't write professionally for 20 minutes.
I've got the battle scars to prove it.
Yeah, damn right. God, I know it. So the first thing you actually wrote were comic books then?
No, professionally, the first thing I wrote was for role-playing game articles for a magazine at Future, actually, called Arcane back in 1996.
Arcane magazine! Oh my God, that is old school nerd. Man, this man has serious nerd credibility, boys and girls. Very serious.
If you go to my website, I actually, through the generosity of an old friend of mine, who still has his collection of Arcane issues, I actually now have scans of all my old articles from Arcane that you can view on my website, because there's no digital edition, no such thing as a digital edition of Arcane.
Right.
So I literally got him to scan the articles for me, and I made PDFs that you can view online from my website. That was 25 years ago, basically, that I started doing that. That's nuts.
Yeah, that really is. So, I mean, for those of you, earlier on, I was, before we started the broadcast, I was saying to Anthony, Oh, I have. How this show works is I have 20 questions. There are 20 categories of nerdy things that, and I ask the guests, like, if they were only allowed to bring one of each category to a desert island, what would that nerdy thing be? Because I've often thought to myself, like, if I could only bring one graphic novel to a desert island, which of many graphic novels would it be? So I have a list of 20 of these, and I was saying I'm going to roll a d20 and get one at random. And then I thought, shit, I left my dice in the house, not in the studio. And of course, Anthony immediately goes, "Oh, sure," and he opens up his dice box and pulls out a d20. So these are the kind of nerds we are, and we are not ashamed to admit it.
I spent the formative years of my life obsessed with role-playing games. When I was a kid, the Fighting Fantasy game books came out.
Oh, yes, I remember those.
Yeah, I loved those. I still have a couple of those on my shelf. And from there, I progressed to role-playing games. I think MERP, Middle-earth Role-Playing, was my very first one.
Middle-earth Role-Playing. I played it myself as well. Unbelievably complicated rules, but
what a ridiculous game to start with. Just incredibly complex. But then I got obsessed with role-playing games. I started designing my own systems for friends to play through and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, right. Yeah, you know what that's like. Running 20 different campaigns at once, and I basically spent almost every waking hour from the ages of about sort of 12, 13 through to 19 or 20, just role-playing or playing computer games. In almost, if I wasn't reading, I was doing one of those two things basically. Just absolutely obsessed with them. So that's why my first professional writing was for Role Playing magazine, and I also wrote supplements for an indie role playing game based at a publisher based in Canada, which was called Providence, and it was a sort of a mashup of fantasy and superhero with winged characters who lived inside a hollow world that was a prison they'd been teleported to. It was it was kind of nuts, but what it allowed me to do was write sort of supplement world books. I wrote two. Unfortunately, only one was published because then the company went bust because the game was a bit too weird. But the one I wrote was called The Kestrels Becoming Fire, and it was about a order of winged martial art monks in this hollow world. And I'm still very, very proud of that because at the time I was practicing Tai Chi. I had to give up. I did karate when I was younger, and I had to give it up after injury. So I practiced Tai Chi instead, and I still do occasionally. But then I was a heavy practitioner, and I basically snuck loads and loads of Tai Chi philosophy and slang and epithets and what have you into this role-playing book. So I'm still very proud of that one.
All right. Well, okay, then let's have the first Desert Island question. Okay, if you can only take one role-playing game to a desert island, which is your role-playing game?
Oh, I thought I was going to roll.
You can roll. You'll roll in a minute. Don't worry. We'll get to that.
No. If I could only take one RPG,
what would it be?
I mean, it's tempting. It's tempting to say GURPS, isn't it? Because of course, GURPS can be anything.
GURPS from Steve Jackson Games.
Yeah, which
was my first professional writing gig. Was for Steve Jackson.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What
I wrote for Car Wars.
Oh, Car Wars! Wow, I remember that. Yeah. It's also tempting to say Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay because I still have the original hardback of that, and of course
that is a brilliant game, a brilliant role-playing game.
I also was a huge fan of the Star Wars RPG. I love Star Wars, but the thing I loved about that, and I bang on about this all the time, was the mechanics.
Yeah, brilliant.
The literal mechanical design of that game. The way that dice rolls were used, things like force points and stuff, was just brilliant, and really was, before Feng Shui came along, was really the only game I could name that encapsulated the spirit of the game in its rules.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree.
I think it really succeeded in that. But I think I'm going to have to go with the original Vampire the Masquerade from White Wolf.
Oh, how gothically predictable.
I know.
Vampire the Masquerade. I could never take that.
I loved the Vampire game. For many reasons. The rules, whatever. The rules were just sort of okay, but nothing special. But that's kind of what I loved about it, because the more I role played, and like I say, I role played a lot. And by the time Vampire came out, I'd been role playing, like 3-4 times a week, every week for my entire life for the last 7 years or something. And the more I played, the more I realized that I just don't care about the rules. The rules are, a means to an end. What I cared about was the telling of the stories. And obviously this feeds into what I then eventually went on to do professionally. And obviously the White Wolf games were all about storytelling. So yeah, that's the one I think I'd take.
I can dig that. I understand that. I think my first experience of Vampire the Masquerade was actually when I saw some people playing it live. Like the live action, and they were using rock, paper, scissors to decide all the functions, and it was the most bizarre experience imaginable. I mean, and not to go down anyone who loves live action role playing, because it's a noble and fine occupation. But I remember seeing all these like goths in really bad makeup going rock, paper, scissors, like with really intent expressions, and I'm like, no, it just didn't work for me,
I used to take part in some of the Mind's Eye Theatre, they called it, and I used to take part in some of that because some of the people I was very close friends with basically ran the Birmingham and Oxford Camarilla, which was the live vampire groups. I actually dated one of the women who was quite high up in the Oxford one for a while. But I could never quite get into it. I've never really been into live role playing at all. And again, as you say, not to knock it at all, but it's just not, for some reason, it's not my thing.
Right.
Sitting around a table, absolutely no problem. But there's something about the live aspect of it that I'm not really into. And the thing is, when I was a kid, I was an amateur actor, and I actually almost went to drama school. I almost went to study drama at Exeter University. Goodness. Yeah. So it's not anything about kind of, and I used to be in bands, and it's not anything about sort of a distaste for performance. I don't know. I just never took to LARP for some reason.
Okay. By the way, folks, if you're watching on the stream, we are watching the stream. If you've got any questions for Anthony or anything you'd like to say, just I can see the chat on Facebook and on Twitch and on YouTube as well. So do feel free. And hi, Maria, Kai, Nelson. Wow, we have a lot of people watching on Facebook right now.
Excellent. And we have a couple of ebooks to give away during this show as well. So stay tuned for that. Yeah.
Yes. So that's a good thing to remember. All right. So let's move on. So comic books. How did you start in comic books?
I grew up reading comic books all my life. Like one of my earliest memories is of my father reading a copy of the Beano to me when I was like 4 years old.
The Beano, for American and European viewers, that is a particularly British comic. Yes. Very, very, very British in every possible way.
Very anarchic and violent and toilet humor and what have you, but safe for kids in that very British way. So yeah,
I'm not sure they'd be considered safe for kids anymore, but
okay. Anyway, graduated to 2000 AD and read loads of stuff like that, and then obviously get comic magazines like Crisis that grew out 2000 AD and Deadline magazine.
Crisis was amazing. I loved that comic book.
Yeah, and Deadline, I loved that. And yeah, sort of was really into that scene. And then of course stuff like Sandman and Cerebus the Aardvark and Exit by Nabil Kanan and stuff like that came out, and the mature comics movement that really just sort of sustained me, and I was like, okay, I want to do this. But I kind of fell out of it for a while because I was focusing on my career as a designer. And then what got me back into comics, funnily enough, was when I was working at .NET. Our online editor at the time was a guy called Chris Mitchell, who ran an online, a literary webzine called Spike Magazine on the side. And he used to get sent books and graphic novels by all sorts of publishers, including Titan Books. And they sent him a copy of a book called Writers on Comics Script Writing, which was a series of interviews with comics writers of the time about how they worked. That's all it was, just like, how do you work? Where do you get your ideas from? How do you write a comics page? Why are you into comics? All that sort of thing. And it was brilliant. And I remembered there were a few names in there that I recognized from the olden days, as it were, people like Grant Morrison and Garth Ennis, the usual suspects. But then there were also people like Warren Ellis in there, whose work at the time I was not familiar with. And so I went out, and basically that persuaded me, like, oh, I'm missing out here. I should get back into comics in a big way. And so I went and got things like Preacher and Transmetropolitan and The Invisibles and got back into comics that way. And that was my route back in. And reading those, and in particular, the original comic series Whiteout, which the movie was based on, but the comic is much better than the movie in that case, by Greg Rucka and Steve Lieber. That was just blew me away. That was by Oni Press. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up doing a lot of work with Oni Press, because they published Whiteout. And so, yeah, I just kind of got back into it that way and thought, okay, this is something I want to do. There's a lot of potential and possibilities in this medium.
I've never read Whiteout. This is
It's
something
great.
I missed completely. Okay.
It's only like maybe 3-4 issues or something. It's very short. It's a short, tight murder mystery, but it is great, and it is much, much better than the movie adaptation.
Okay, I'm going to have to check that one out. This is good. I'm learning something myself here. This is excellent. And yeah, and The Invisibles, of course, that's one of my absolutely all-time favorite comic books. And we are going to have Grant Morrison on the show sometime in the next few weeks, hopefully.
I'm looking forward to watching that one myself.
Yeah, Grant's always an amazing, fascinating, interesting character, as well as being an unbelievably brilliant writer. So yeah,
And
so I will
a
have
thoroughly
Grant on the
nice guy
show
as
for
well,
sure.
as you know.
Sorry, what was that?
I said, and he's a thoroughly nice guy as well.
He's a
as you
lovely,
know.
lovely
Yeah.
human being. I absolutely adore him. All right. Well, okay, comic books then. Desert Island comic book. Which is it going to be?
It kind of depends. And I'm not going to reel off all the comics that I love, because we'd be here for days.
You're only allowed one. One
right,
graphic,
that's the thing.
well, or a series.
That's what I was going to ask. Okay, so if we're allowed a whole series, then it would be The Invisibles.
Really? Oh, because
Yeah,
that would be mine as well. Because
yeah.
I've already read that entire graphic novel twice, and I still don't know what happens at the end.
Yeah. I think I have an idea what happens, but yeah.
Because by the time you're 2/3 of the way through, your brain has just gone into the psychedelic alternative universe where you're like, it's like you're dreaming or something. It's just that comic book is such an incredible effect.
It's a toss-up between that and Sandman, basically. But I think Invisibles holds together better as a complete work. There are arcs of Sandman that are sublime, but then there are some which are, just a bit more pedestrian. Whereas the sum total of Invisibles is fantastic and thought-provoking and, as you say, mind-bending. So, yeah, if we're allowed a series, that's what I take. If we were only allowed one volume, I was going to say From Hell. Just because that is...
Really?
You could say all the same things about From Hell. It's so perfectly constructed, brilliant philosophical, mind-bending stuff in it. Yeah. It's not actually my favourite work of Alan's. My favourite work of Alan's is V for Vendetta.
Yeah.
But From Hell, I think, has got more to dig into.
I think
so if I was on a desert island, I'd want something that I can, read and reread over and over again.
Yeah, V for Vendetta is a freaking masterpiece. From Hell is really good. I liked it a lot, but the problem with From Hell is the central premise of the plot about it being Freemasons and so on was just such complete nonsense. And I'll give Alan Moore credit that when he released the graphic novel version, he put in afterwards saying, "Yeah, actually, this was actually bullshit. I fucked it all up." And so I'll give him credit for admitting that. But when I was reading, I'm like, this makes no freaking sense whatsoever to me. And it's a brilliant piece of comic work. But
well, that's the thing. I approach it purely as a work of fiction. I'm not interested in Ripper theories and stuff. It's not something I've ever been obsessed by or whatever. But purely as a work of fiction, I think it is pretty great.
It's funny because Devil Faust is on the Twitch chat. Devil Faust is actually Brian Freisinger, who was the guest on last week's show. And this is how nerdy we all are, right? Brian says, as a funny turnaround, I ran a vampire RPG game based on From Hell.
Excellent. That's all right. Hey, here's a nerdy one for you. Well, sort of nerdy and not nerdy. We talked about GURPS earlier. The beauty of GURPS is, it's generic. That's the whole point. You can use it for anything. I ran a Miami Vice role-playing game using the GURPS system.
I love Miami Vice, man. I
Yeah,
still
no,
think
me
Miami
too.
Vice is one of the greatest TV shows of all time.
I agree. I was obsessed with Miami Vice when I was younger. It changed the face of TV. But I literally ran a role-playing game set in the world of Miami Vice using GURPS.
Yeah, and Edward James Olmos was in Miami Vice. He was the captain, and he was brilliant. It was one of the greatest.
Yes, he was.
He was absolutely amazing in that show.
Yes, he was.
I actually ran a Paranoia game. If you know Paranoia, do you ever
I
play
do, yeah,
Paranoia?
yep.
Wonderful role-playing
Trust the
game set in the far distant future. And it was a Paranoia game. I actually had 12 players who wanted to play, and I was like, how can I run a role-playing game with 12 players? So what they didn't realize, it was actually Miami Vice, but set in the far distant future, and they were all given like incredibly expensive cars and weapons, none of which worked correctly, and they were being filmed all the time. But they thought they were real cops. They'd been made real cops, but they were actually anyway. Now we're getting very nerdy indeed. So is anybody on the Facebook chat got into say? I'm not seeing a lot of. I'm seeing a lot of. Hi Jared. Hi. I'm seeing a lot of people saying hi on Facebook, but feel free to ask questions or say hello on the Facebook chat, folks.
Come on,
and there's a lot of action on the Twitch chat. Hi, Kloshar is having it. Kloshar is a friend of mine called Danny. He's like a big GURPS fan. So as soon as you mention GURPS and Vampire the Masquerade, he's gone on his own entire essay at the moment on Twitch. Anyway, so okay. So from there, what did you go? Where did you go from comic books? Was it computer games after that?
Yes. So I'd been writing comics professionally for 6 years, when through a convoluted my entire career is a convoluted series of coincidences and circumstances, which is one of the things I like about it. But yeah, through such a series of circumstances, I got the job writing the comic book prequel to a video game that was in development, and that game was Dead Space. At the time, a lot of people don't realize this now. If you weren't in the medium at the time, you wouldn't know. But at the time, prequel and sequel comic books to video games always came out after the game. The game was released, the game's a hit, the marketing department says, hey, let's make a comic book. And 2 years later, out comes a comic book, and it's rubbish. No disrespect to the people who worked on them, but they were rubbish. And what they wanted to do with Dead Space was something entirely different, what we now call transmedia. But at the time, there was no word for it. And they developed the game, a prequel comic book, and a prequel anime movie at the same time. All three of them at the same time. And they were all released. I think the comic book was released first, then the anime movie, then the game. I think. And I was hired to write the comic book. But as it turned out, there were other people from the comics world involved in the game and indeed writing the anime movie. There were lots of people from comics involved in Dead Space. There was me, Warren Ellis, Rick Remender, Justin Gray, and Jimmy Palmiotti. All of us doing fundamental either background or development or scripting work on Dead Space. So I wrote the comic book, and so I was involved in a lot of discussions about building the world and what have you, because obviously, I was setting it. The comic book is set on the planet, not the ship on which the game takes place. So I needed to invent a whole lot of stuff from whole cloth, and to do that, I needed to know how the world worked, etc., etc. I think I had handed in the script to the second issue of the comic. And things were going well, and they basically liked it well enough that they said, hey, this is going really well. Would you like to try out for writing the game? To which I said, fuck yeah, let me at it. And so they gave me a tryout to do, and they liked that, and I was hired to write the game.
All right, let's see a little bit of Dead Space then. For those of you who have never played Dead Space, this is what it looks like.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a twinkle all the night.
Whoops, looks like the video crashed. How weird was that? How weird was that? Oh my goodness. Okay.
It must be the alien powers corrupting your video.
Yeah, really. So yeah, that was Dead Space. One of the most brilliant video games ever. I mean, it was an absolute
really
revelation.
I got really lucky with Dead Space. I mean, part of it was that when I was talking to them about coming on board to write the comic, I realized that they were trying. These were people who had the same influences and cultural touchstones that I did, and they wanted to make the same kind of horror game that I liked playing. You know, at that time, survival horror was in a bit of a rut, and was not what it once was. And they wanted to kind of take things back to basics, back to the great days of Silent Hill 1 and 2, the first Resident Evil games, that sort of thing. And so I was totally on board with that. So that was why I said yes, and I'll come on board. Nevertheless, nobody could have predicted what happened with Dead Space. And the fact is, the first game did not sell that many copies. I think we sold 1.5 million, which for a video game is not actually that many. But the impact it had was huge. The cultural impact was like, it's 14 years since I started work on the game. It's 12 years since the game was released. And still, when I do video game events, or when I meet people who play video games, when people learn that I wrote Dead Space, that's the game that everybody wants to talk to me about. That is the one. I could dine out on that game for the rest of my life. I was in Kazakhstan 18 months ago for a Comic-Con. Believe it or not, they have Comic-Cons in Kazakhstan. And all anybody wanted to, this was just after Atomic Blonde had came out. Mm-hmm. So I naturally thought everybody would want to talk to me about Atomic Blonde. But no, all they wanted to talk about was Dead Space. I couldn't walk the floor of the convention without handlers because I was being mobbed by people who wanted to take selfies with me. This for me is a very unusual experience. This does not normally happen anywhere. And it was because of Dead Space. It wasn't because of Atomic Blonde. All these people, I did a Q&A on stage with a translator, and all anybody asked about was Dead Space. It was like, this isn't crazy. What's going on here? It's nuts.
No, and I'm not surprised because that is one of the milestone games of video gaming. I mean, it is now, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was interesting. There's an interesting story came out just like a week ago, I think, that in the US, a judge ruled that video games are art. It was a court case about copyright, about protected speech, and the judge ruled that video games are now officially artistic, and things in video games are protected by artistic expression, and it's only like a week ago that the great wild world out there finally admitted video games are art, you know. But Dead Space was one of those things that 14 years ago helped establish that it's a great work of art, and it's a great work of literature as well. I mean, it's got a story, it's got a really and emotional impact, and it's got relationships between the characters, and it's but
and that's because everybody, I just want to make clear, that's because everybody on the team was committed to that. Because I've worked ever since then, I've worked in video games like that. Like I say, I got really lucky, and that set me up, and I have worked in video games ever since, pretty much continually. I don't think there has ever been a time in my career since that I haven't been working on at least one video game. So, you know, I owe that entire side of my career to Dead Space. But it wasn't just me. I have worked on many, many games since where I've tried to bring the same kind of sensibility to things as I did on Dead Space. But the rest of the team hasn't been as committed to making that sort of game or that quality of narrative. And sometimes it's suffered as a result. So, yes, I wrote the script, but there was a whole team of other people, behind and around me who came up with everything else to help make it such a narratively memorable game.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the same in video games on movies, I guess, in that
Yeah.
it's a giant team effort all the time. Unlike where comic books are basically just got 2, maybe 3 people involved, or writing a novel, which is like it's just you sitting there,
Just me without a
staring at
tightrope.
yeah, staring at the ceiling. But yeah. Okay. Do you play video games, or do you just write them?
Yeah.
You're a video gamer?
Yeah,
Okay,
no,
what's your
of course I
design
play.
video game?
You can't make video games if you don't play them. It's just,
I think so too, yeah. Absolutely.
You cannot, because I've come across people who've wanted to get into games, and I say, well, what do you play? And they don't. And I'm like, that's not going to work. So believe it or not, so I love narrative games, obviously. Of course I do. I love story-based games. But I also love high-speed Twitch racing games, like Burnout, Need for Speed, those kind of games. Arcade, specifically. I don't like the realistic ones. I don't like physics-based, realistic driving games. Those bore the tears off me. I want arcade, fast, physics-defying, frenetic action. And so if I could only take one video game away to a desert island, it would actually be SSX3, the snowboarding game.
No, that shocks me. I didn't expect that one. SSX3 snowboarding. Okay, fine.
I absolutely love the SSX game. Yeah, SSX3 was kind of the pinnacle of that series. Fantastic races, great course design, great trick courses as well. Lots of great fun characters. Yeah, it was just. We in the household, we bought a PS2 to play SSX3. It was an SSX machine for us. We went to one of my oldest friends. Every video game console that comes out, he has it. He buys it as soon as it's released. And he had SSX3, and we went down to stay with him for a weekend, and we wound up staying up. I mean, no, not because of the game. We just went to stay with him. But while we were there, he showed us SSX3, and we wound up staying up to play that game until like 4 a.m. in the morning. And literally in the car on the way back, we just sort of looked at one another and went, so we're buying a PS2 then.
Did you ever play the snowboarding game on the Wii that had a balance board?
I did not. No, I know the one you mean, but no.
That was completely cool. I mean, the Wii balance board was. I mean, I was a big Nintendo Wii fan. I mean, people out there are probably going, "What?" But the Wii was great because it was so physical, and they had the balance board. They did a snowboard game where you turned the balance board to one side and stood on it, and you could actually snowboard. And that was pretty cool. Though, my God, it really hurt the thighs. But yeah. It was. I still think that's someone that's massively missing. I mean, I love the VR stuff, but if somebody did a balance board for VR, it'd be great for doing sports on.
Oh, you'd fall over so much. Wow.
I know, especially in VR, you can't see what you're doing.
Yeah.
People keep asking me, will I do a gaming stream in VR sometime? And I'm like, I know it's going to happen, but I know it's going to be so incredibly freaking embarrassing when we standing there with this big headset on, like falling all over the place while people laugh at me. But anything for entertainment, right, folks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's have another random Desert Island question. Why don't you use your D20 and let's see what number we get. Got to roll a D20 if we're being nerds here.
That is a 19, a 1-9.
19, okay. So, animal companions. If you're allowed one animal companion on your desert island, what would you take with you as your animal companion?
I would take with me a lurcher.
A lurcher?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a dog, right?
Yeah, sorry, yes, a dog, yeah. We had 2 lurchers until last year. For like 14, 15 years. Unfortunately, we lost both of them within the space of the year. Ouch. But they were old. They had good, long lives. But yeah, we absolutely adore lurchers. The funny thing is that neither of us we both love dogs. We've grown up with dogs, but neither of us had ever really come into contact much with lurchers until we decided we wanted a dog. We contacted a local rescue and said to them, we'll foster whatever you've got. Nothing bigger than a collie, please. But 2 days later, they turned up with this lurcher at the front door. Now, lurchers, for people who don't know, are greyhounds crossed with another type of dog. And the one they turned up with, the dog that we eventually adopted, called Connor, basically came up to my waist. And he was well, we don't know actually, because he was found wandering the streets, so we don't know exactly what he was, but we think he was a greyhound crossed with a Saluki and possibly some German Shepherd in there. And we just instantly fell for this kind of dog, partly because they are perfect freelancer dogs, because they sleep all day. People think because they're really fast dogs that they need loads of exercise. They don't. They need 10, 15 minutes of like bursting around at top speed, and then they sleep for 16 hours. It's great.
Like a cat. Yeah,
I guess, but you know, more fun to sort of play with and walk.
Right. Sure. Oh, somebody asked a question earlier on in the chat. I forgot to mention. Somebody asked, what was the Funko Pop that's behind your head?
Oh, that is an Atomic Blonde Funko Pop.
Oh, of course it is. Wow. You know you've made it as a nerd hero when they start making Funko Pops of your characters.
Indeed, yes. So that is
Lorraine Broughton. Fabulous. Yep. Fabulous. You know, as like I said earlier, that, you know, for years people have been saying, why isn't there a female James Bond? And Lorraine Broughton is the female James Bond. There's no question about that. Yeah,
well, and much more so in the movie than the graphic novel. The graphic novel is much more sort of John le Carré in tone and style. And the movie obviously is not. But I was a co-producer on the movie. And I was involved in it right from the start. I read the screenplays, all the early drafts, because I didn't write the screenplay. I wrote the graphic novel, didn't write the screenplay. That was Kurt Jonstad. And so I knew it was always going to be a much more action-focused kind of movie. That's fine. You know, if you just tried to film the graphic novel, it wouldn't work. It would be quite dull, frankly. You can do things on the page and with words and pictures and stuff, you know, in text that you just can't do when things are moving. So I had no problem with that. And then Dave Leitch came along and said, well, this is a noir, but obviously we don't want to make a noir on screen. You know, we're not going to film in black and white. What if instead, you know, we tried to make a noir that was actually really colorful, and we saturated the colors and made it noir that way to go with the 80s. And so that's why you have the visual aesthetic of the movie. And I just thought that was an absolute stroke of genius.
Yeah, it was absolute genius. I mean, did you actually go to Berlin at that period? I mean, for those of you who haven't seen the movie or read the comic book, it's set right at the collapse of the Berlin Wall. So
I never went to Berlin while the wall was up. I first went to Berlin. Yeah, I first went to Berlin in 1993. So bits of the wall were still there. And I don't just mean the commemorative bits that they have now. I mean, literally parts of the wall were still standing in 1993. But obviously, it was post-reunification. So most of the flavor that I got for the graphic novel from that period was from doing a lot of research, a lot of reading. But also, frankly, I may not have been to Berlin, but I grew up here in Europe in the 1980s. When the Iron Curtain still existed, when the Berlin Wall still existed, when the Cold War still existed, and we all lived, you know, thinking that we were going to get blown to atoms by nuclear bombs any day now. And those things are fairly universal. You know, if you lived during those times, we all know what it was like. And I didn't find it that hard to evoke those times, frankly, because they were so vivid. So it was just lots and lots of research.
Well, I can tell you, I actually was in Berlin then. I spent a lot of time in Berlin in the late 80s. And the thing that caught me when I saw the movie, because I didn't know the comic book, and the movie was how I got introduced to your work.
Yeah.
And I saw the movie, and as well as being just this great action ass-kicking flick, it really encapsulated what it was like. It really was. I mean, I was watching going like, oh my God, that's exactly what it was like. You know, the nightclubs. I have been in those nightclubs, listened to that music. Except the one thing you missed, you didn't have any of my music in it, which was it. I was highly disappointed. I kept expecting to hear the Cassandra Complex in the background all the way through. Like, oh my God, this would be just perfect if they played me. But no.
If it had been up to me, Rodney,
I know. What can I tell you, my friend?
Choice.
Anyway, apart from that very small, tiny minor flaw, the scenery was perfect. The atmosphere was perfect. And it really completely blew me away because I was in Berlin a lot. I mean, I went through Checkpoint Charlie and went into the East and did the whole thing, like, you know, and it really was like a John le Carré or Len Deighton novel. And it was so weird when you went through Checkpoint Charlie because, like, on the West Berlin side, it was like modern industrialized city, and you would go through Checkpoint Charlie and everything went black and white. You know, it was weird. It felt like you were going into a black and white movie because East Berlin was really grey and monochrome, and there were guys, you know, with hats and long overcoats who were standing in street corners trying to, like, sell you black market money and stuff like that. And it was so quiet, you know. The one thing that was slightly unrealistic about the movie, the only thing that I found, well, there were two things I found unrealistic. One was there were too many cars on the streets. I mean, they got all the Trabants and things were there, which was great, you know. And I love the bit where they're trying to outrun the guy in a Trabant and the guy's running alongside it because that's how fast those things actually went. They were so slow you could literally outpace them on foot, which was in the movie, and I love that. But when I went to East Berlin, I mean, those things were super expensive. They were the shittiest cars ever made, but they were super expensive. So there were hardly any of them in the street. You could see the cop cars going along, but private cars, there were so, and it was just so quiet because people were just walking around looking at the ground. It was eerie, but amazing. You know, it was amazing if you grew up on that kind of spy novel, and that feeling of going through Checkpoint Charlie and the guys at the border who would look at you and look at your passport and look at you, and that was perfect. It was absolutely correct, and everything else, the Berlin nightclubs, the scenery, the cathedral, absolutely spot on. That's exactly what it was like, except for her hotel room, which was bright neon purple, which was very Miami Vice. But trust me, no hotel rooms in the 80s actually were bright neon purple.
Again, that, you know, not up to me. If you read the graphic novel, she's in a very, very ordinary, you know, sort of, I suppose you might now think of it like a Travelodge style hotel room, you know, completely prosaic.
But it was absolutely perfect for the movie. It was absolutely perfect. So everything about that was really... So I really wanted to ask you about that because it felt so much like what it was like. And in the background on the movie as well, when there's all the news footage of the wall coming down, I mean, I was actually in Hamburg on the night the wall came down. I was actually seeing the Young Gods in concert.
Oh, cool!
If you know the Young Gods, who are a German-speaking band, are from Switzerland. And we had just found out. We literally had just found out the wall had come down, and the concert. I was playing. They were playing at the Große Freiheit in Hamburg, which means great freedom. You know, and it was incredible. It was absolutely fucking amazing. Everyone was crying, and the band did like a whole bunch of old Kurt Weill songs and stuff like that, and it was just. It was a remarkable experience. And then when I walked out of the club, they played for like 2-3 hours or something. Nobody wanted. When I walked out of the club, the whole of Hamburg was full of Trabants, these East German cars. And the reason why is because you couldn't get porn in East Germany, right? Porn was illegal. So the first thing all the East Germans did, the moment the wall came down, they all drove to Hamburg to get porn. So, you know.
2000 Hamburg.
True story.
Yep.
2000 Hamburg 4, yeah. The Sisters Mercy were living in Hamburg at the time. So the next day I actually went to Berlin and helped knock the wall down because it was like, shit, I've got to be there. So I was actually... And so for years I had a bit of the Berlin Wall on my desk when I was writing. So
no, but what I do, the memories. I mean, I was here in England. I was 17 years old when the wall came down, and my memories of that night are just sort of burned into my brain because I remember watching the live pictures on the BBC News, and just again, people who weren't here at that time can't quite understand. The idea that the Iron Curtain might fall, the idea that the Berlin Wall might ever come down was inconceivable to people like you and I who grew up like that. Or maybe not you because you knew Germany better, but to people like me living here in England, the idea that this thing might one day end just seemed impossible. And then here it was happening live right in front of our eyes. And it was mesmerizing. And that's why I wrote The Coldest City, which is what the graphic novel of Atomic Blonde was originally called. I knew I wanted to write a Cold War spy thriller. And I just thought, well, what was the most vital time of the Cold War? What was the most interesting time that I could set, a spy thriller? And it had to be around that time when the wall was coming down, because the whole of European history just changed. Everybody in Europe was affected by this.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah. Well, on the subject of spy novels, the latest one, you've written another great spy novel as well, which is Exphoria Code. Let's have a look at that. This is, and I read this last year, I think I read this, and I freaking love this book. I absolutely love this book. And it's very different from the whole Atomic Blonde, Cold City vibe. It's a much more, for want of a better word, normal, middle of the road kind of spy novel, but still absolutely brilliant. I mean, it really reminded me of, like you say, John le Carre, but more like Len Deighton. I used to love Len Deighton books when I was a kid. I grew up on spy stories like that. And this
it's also massively more nerdy than your average spy book.
Super nerdy.
That's the other thing. It is super nerdy. The main character is a goth hacker, and the book does not shy away, as you know, from either of those facets of her personality. The whole thing is about cyber espionage. Her identity as a goth is very important. I mean, it's important to the plot, but it's also important to her character. The second book, actually, The Tempest Project, comes out next month, and God willing, in the middle of all this. And that delves kind of even further in a way. Her gothdom isn't quite as important to the plot in that one, but it is vitally important to her development as a character, and really sort of goes, if anything, even deeper with some of the references.
Yeah, I mean, I love the book. I mean, another thing I thought was interesting about it is, again, it's got a female protagonist. And
that's my career. I mean, I've written female main characters my entire career. Not always, not exclusively, but a huge amount, probably a majority. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I find them really interesting. It's partly because I find them really interesting to write about, but it's also partly about trying to redress a balance.
Definitely.
I remember many, many years ago, Joss Whedon was being interviewed, and somebody said to him something like, "Why do you keep writing female characters?" And he said, "Because you keep asking me that question." Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, I mean, okay, we're two men talking about female characters, so I would love to hear if any females out there have read the book or seen the movie or any of Antony's works and would care to chip in about your perception of his writing female characters. I'm sure we'd both love to hear about it. But
all I can say in my defense is that my agent, my literary agent, that is, my video games agent, for some time, not now, but for many, many years, my video games agent, and my first Hollywood agent were all women, and all basically approved, as it were.
Well, I have
my work. So.
I have no doubt about that. I mean, I thought
no, I know, but I'm just saying it's like I hear from a lot of female readers. I work with a lot of women and stuff, and I am very careful, and I have female beta readers as well, and I am very careful to listen to what they say about my depictions of female characters. It's not something that I take for granted or approach in a blasé way. But so far, I'm pretty confident that I'm doing okay.
No, I mean, I loved it. I mean, I think Brigitte Sharp is a brilliant heroine. She's I found the book completely riveting. I mean, I read it, I think, in 2 sittings. And it was a really interesting, because I started off and I thought, yeah, and I'm reading the first chapter and going, this is quite interesting. It's quite an okay novel. Yeah, it's all right. It's not bad. And I got to the second, third chapters. Yeah, it's okay. And then I'm halfway through it. It's 4:00 in the morning, and I'm like, "Holy shit!" And I didn't really want to I didn't want to close it because I couldn't. And it crept up on me and smacked me around the back of the head at how good and that's how good it was.
Excellent.
So I'm really genuinely looking forward to the next one.
How can you resist that?
What was that? Sorry.
Usenet references in the second chapter.
Yeah, right. The old hackers, yes.
If that doesn't draw you in, what will?
No, it's a really, really good book, and it's genuinely a great spy novel, and it definitely needs to be a BBC and now a major BBC series. I mean, it's got BBC series written all over it.
I mean, it almost was, and who knows? Maybe at some point it will be. It was released, not long after the movie Atomic Blonde came out, and we had a lot of interest. And at one point, we had a very, very serious offer from, I don't want to name names and shame people, but a very credible offer from a credible company whose work you would be familiar with. And then at the last minute, it all fell through. And that's through nobody's fault. Through nobody's fault, circumstances beyond our control and all that, it just didn't happen. And that's Hollywood in a nutshell. My experience ever since I started, I mean, literally my first ever fiction book, I had a Hollywood producer approaching me, asking me to option it. And the whole thing then fell through. That's kind of, but that's normal. That's
absolutely.
Normal.
I mean, if you look at someone like Michael Moorcock, who we talked about in the last show, I mean, he's probably, well, in my opinion, the greatest writer in the world right now, the greatest living writer we have. And he's in his 70s, in his 80s or something. And he's only now getting a TV show made. Only now. Yeah. And he's been writing since the 60s.
Right. And why is that happening now? Because of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, because of Game of Thrones, yeah. So they're finally going to they're finally optioned Elric, and there's talk about Amazon or Netflix for Elric.
Well, I think it's one of those situations, much like used to happen with Watchmen all the time, where I think Elric's been optioned many, many times.
Right.
It's just that an option means nothing. When you see the stories in the press about, so-and-so's been optioned, it means nothing. Until they start casting. Literally, do not believe anything you hear about anything being optioned. Just don't give it any mind until they get to the point of casting around, because then it's starting to get serious. Still may not be anything, but that's a lot more serious, because that means they've got the money from somewhere.
Right.
And that's what if my the last few years experience in Hollywood has taught me anything, it's that all that matters is who's paying for it. Have we got the money? And until somebody is putting up the money to make a movie, it's all just talk. It's all just bullshit.
Speaking of Watchmen, did you see the TV show?
I did. I thought it was a lot better than the movie.
I actually loved the movie.
Yeah.
And most people hated it. I loved the movie because it was like basically they almost shot for shot from the comic book.
That's one of the reasons I didn't like it. I didn't hate it, but I
really enjoyed it, but I seem to be in the minority. But but the TV show, I really expected the TV show to be absolute shit, and it wasn't.
Great,
It was really great. Yeah, it was astonishingly well done. It was remarkable
because it wasn't slavish, because it built on the source material, as all good adaptations should do.
Yeah, it did. All right, so we've been talking for an hour already. So you said you've got some giveaways, some freebies.
I have indeed. So I have two EPUB format copies of the Exphoria Code, which my publishers will give away to two of your live viewers. Okay. We just need their email addresses. So I'm not sure how you want to do that. Basically, my publisher will email the two lucky people a copy each. We also, for everyone who doesn't win an ebook, have an exclusive discount code just for viewers of this video, which you can redeem for for a copy of the Exphoria Code, or you can pre-order the Tempest Project with this same code as well. Okay. You'll get 30% off if you get it from the publisher's website. So The website is iBooks, i-books, EYE-books.com. The imprint is Lightning, which is an imprint of iBooks. But go to iBooks.com, search for my name. I'll give you a link that you can put in.
Yeah, that's the best part. Give me a link, and I'll put it on my Twitch page, and I'll put it on the Facebook my Facebook page.
Order either of my books from that publisher, and then at checkout, use the code Orpheus. See? Yes. That's how we know that it came from this show, you see. So use the code Orpheus at checkout, and you'll get 30% off. That's, managed to wangle that from my publisher.
Yeah, and it is really well worth it. Like I said, it's a brilliant book, and if you want a book to keep you going at the moment, it's freaking perfect for that. So yeah, you should definitely get it.
Drone warfare, yes.
Oh, Devil Faust. Brian says this is from last week's show. Brian Freisinger, who was, if you haven't seen last week's show, it's still on the Twitch page. It didn't get streamed to Facebook, but you can see it on twitch.tv/Rodney418. That's me. Brian's show was really good. Brian was the guy who did the visual effects on The Matrix and Constantine and Serenity and a whole bunch of stuff. It was a really good show. Not because of him, not because of me, but anyway. But Brian says he wants to hear the answer to the question he couldn't answer last week, which was... if you were allowed one luxury item with no real practical utility on your desert island, what would that be? And I asked him that, and he was like, he completely froze because Brian has no luxuries in his life. He is the most boring guy in the world because all he does is make great movies and video games and go spearfishing and shoot things and stuff. But he never does anything that doesn't have a practical use. So
I mean, define practical use.
Well, I don't know.
You know, I could say, well, give me an iPad, and then then I'm connected with everybody in the world anyway, you know. Mm-hmm. Assuming that's disqualified, I guess I'd say a guitar.
A guitar? You know? Yeah, that's a good luxury item. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. It's
so you actually play music as well? I know you do. You do a music podcast, right? You do a writer podcast and a music podcast.
Yeah. I have a podcast where I talk to writers called Writing and Breathing, and then I have a podcast I do with my friend Brian Latendry about heavy metal albums called Thrash It Out. Go and search.
That's a great name for a heavy metal podcast. I love it.
Thank you. But yes, I also make music. At the moment, I make mostly dark ambient sort of stuff. Although not my most recent, the album before that, was actually a sort of unofficial soundtrack to William Gibson's novel Neuromancer called Dead Channel.
And that was from the first line of the book.
Exactly. And it was a throwback. Every song is based on a phrase in the book. Okay. And it was sort of throwback 80s synth pop kind of, synth rock kind of stuff. That's quite fun. Unsurprisingly, that's my best-selling album. But I also play guitar. Not very well, I hasten to add. But I play guitar, and I used to sing in metal and goth rock bands when I was younger. So yes, I would take a guitar.
All right.
Well, learn to play it better.
Well, I'm going to plug my own record since we're talking to ambient records. For those of you who don't already know, my new album came out yesterday, and that is an ambient album as well. Places Beginning with N by Rodney Orpheus, folks. It's on Spotify and it's on my Bandcamp, whatever. Please go listen to it. And if
it's very good, I've heard it.
Oh, thanks, man. That's great. Well, if you're making dark ambient records, we should maybe do a record. That would be fun.
I would be 100% up for that. Absolutely.
Yes. All right. Deal. Okay. That sounds like that's good. Okay. So Clusher says he needs to hear that album now. Okay, he's already Googling it. We'll put some links up later. Antony Ozinski. Oh, right. Antony says pick us. Okay. Antony Ozinski, a friend of mine from Poland who runs PSP Audioware, who are a brilliant company. They make audio plugins, which I use all the time on my stuff. He asks, which DAW do you use when you're recording? Which computer digital audio workstation when you're recording?
I am a dyed-in-the-wool Mac head. I have been using Macs since 1988 because my high school was one of the first in the country to get a Macintosh Plus, I think it was. I can't actually remember. One of the little all-in-one 7-inch screen units, black and white, you know. It was bought for the art department, and the head of the art department in the school happened to be my form tutor. So I got sort of access to it. I actually produced 3 school magazines on that thing, on that old Apple Mac. It was that was, you know, and who knew? Then I would go on to actually create and design magazines professionally. So I use Logic. I use Logic to edit all my podcasts as well. I'm familiar with it. It makes sense to me as a Mac head. You know, the UI and conventions make sense to me. I have watched people use things like Cubase, and I cannot get my head around them.
Yeah, I'm the exact opposite, because I started with the Cubase. So when I see Logic, I'm just like, what are these people doing? This is so weird.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a tool, isn't it? You know, it's like the video editing. What is it? Avid versus, I can't remember
Final
the name
Cut
of the
or
other one,
whatever.
but yeah, you know, they're just tools. They all do the same thing
Right.
at the end of the day. You know.
This is true, and it depends what you like. Funny enough, I was doing lots of video editing this week, and I hate video editors. So video editing software is the worst in the world.
I had to take a crash course in video editing this week as well. I had to learn Lightworks for the Crime Writers Association. I'm sort of cutting together videos for a promotional thing that they're doing, because I'm on the committee of the CWA. And yeah, Jesus,
Yeah,
what a mess.
the only one I find that I can get my head around is Vegas, Sunny Vegas, because that's actually written for musicians. It's written by musicians, so it's a video editor that works like a dog. But I think it's
All right.
I don't know if it's even available on the Mac. I think it might be Windows
Probably
only.
not.
Yeah,
Probably
but
not.
that one I can understand. But all the others are just like, what the hell is this? It's like so bizarre. But anyway, so there you go. Antony uses Logic. And if you're ever looking for some plugins, you should get that PSP stuff. I should hook you and Antony up together, because I used, like, especially for ambient stuff. They have this amazing multi-tap delay that I used all over the lot. It's like 8 delay lines in a row. It's great for doing big ambient washes things. The PSP 608. I used loads on the last album.
I am very much a sort of dabbling, you know, I am the man who knows just enough to be dangerous. And so what I tend to do with my ambient stuff is, because I've never used an analog synthesizer in my life. So I have no idea what any of those controls do. So what I do is I will load up, and I do this literally on every single track that I do. I load up some instruments, and then I go into the synthesizer settings for that instrument and just fuck around with everything to change the sound. And then I'll layer loads and loads of effects and, you know, whatever, can't even think what they're called, pre-cues and stuff in there, and just reverb and just swamp it with effects so that it sounds unique. And that's, you know, that's how that's how I create sounds. I just screw around until I get something I like, which again, I gather is pretty much what most musicians do. The difference is that I don't know what any of these buttons mean.
Well, Andrew from X Studios in Cleveland, who actually does a show about synthesizers, he says, is there another way to do it?
Exactly.
So the experts agree that is totally fine and okay. So there you go, Antony. There's the answer to your question. So are there any other last questions before we go? Oh, yeah, we've got to give away the codes for the book. Do not put your email address in the chat, folks. That would be a very bad idea. But if you would like to be considered for a free copy of Exphoria Code, just type me or someone like that, or free book, please, or whatever into the chat. And I'll have a look through, and we'll roll a D20 again or whatever.
I was just going to say, we'll roll the dice.
Yeah, we've got the D20. Zelda Twinkle Toes, she's saying me. Somebody's in. Vixen says me. Oh, the first two to say me are women, which I think is really interesting. Yeah.
Excellent.
So I'm not seeing anybody. X Studio says me. Callan says me, pretty please. That's 5 people, 3 of whom are female, which I think is excellent. Okay. I'm not seeing anybody coming up on the Facebook chat. I don't know if my Facebook chat how live my Facebook chat is. I'm just trying to go through it at the moment. The Facebook chat is really weird. Oh, Elena Phenom Kovakina says book. Christopher Weiss says me. Okay, that's good. I'm finally getting the Facebook chat coming up. This is good. All right, so we've got a few people saying me and book. Batcat93 says yes, please. All right, so we've got a few people. So I will. Well, we can actually. How many have we got? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 coming up there. Christopher, Elena, Kat, and Michelle. Hey, Kat, Kat. Have you just said me in 2 different chats? Kat Borgen, you've got to be Catbot93, right?
Is that Kat Borgen? Right. Hello, Kat.
Oh, you know Kat Borgen. Okay, well, there you go.
That's how I know you.
And Tony says, book, please, and comic from my son. Well, maybe we can arrange a comic in exchange for some PSP plugins.
Right, I'll tell you what. Why don't you... I'll tell a story while you cut and paste all of those names into a document, and then we'll roll the dice.
No, why don't you just roll the dice, and I'll count it, and roll a d20, and we'll count the people on Twitch first, and how about we do one from the people on Twitch and one for people on Facebook, or
Actually,
whatever.
That's a really good idea. But I'm going to tell this story anyway because
yes, go ahead.
This is another example of that crazy set of circumstances that I love so much. Like those things where you look back on the chain and you realize if one link in that chain wasn't there, things would be completely different. So I was on the Warren Ellis forum back in the day, which was a Delphi forum that Warren used to run back in the late 90s and early 2000s. On the Warren Ellis forum, through the Warren Ellis forum, I met Meredith Yayanos, the theremin player and violinist. She's played with Amanda Palmer. She releases stuff under her own name, under the Parlor Trick. She was on that. Did you see that Feminazgul album that came out a couple of weeks ago? She performed on that. Anyway, Meredith, we've been friends as a result for many a year. I found myself in July 2015. I was in San Francisco, and I realized for an Image Comics promotional event, and I realized that I was going to be there on July 4th. I had never spent July 4th in the United States before, so I thought, do I know anybody in San Francisco that I could spend July 4th with? I extended my stay to be there on July 4th. Meredith, at that time, was in San Francisco. We got together on July 4th, hung out that day, walked along the beach, walked up some hills and all that sort of thing. And then in the evening, she said, oh, let's go to a party that some friends of mine are having out in, I think it was Sausalito. And so we went there, and those friends were Rebecca and Ryan Cosboom. And who was at that party but somebody called Kat Borgen, who I'd never met. But I was wearing a Paradise Lost T-shirt. And Kat, when I walked in, went, I've supported them. And I said, really? Who are you? How have you supported them? And we got chatting and what have you. And then I friended Kat on Facebook. 2 years later, Kat had some post on Facebook. Can't even remember what it was. May not have been 2 years, actually. And you commented on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wait, is that Rodney from the Cassant? Really? There can't be 2 people called Rodney Orpheus in the world. Come on. And so I looked up, and sure enough, it was you. And so I messaged you and said, hey, guy, man, I'm a fan, blah, blah, blah. Not even expecting that you'd reply back, but you did. And then we met that time in London for the first time. And here we are now.
So it's all the fault of Kat Borgen. Thank you, Kat. And Kat said it was actually San Rafael, she says.
Oh, there you go. Okay, right.
Yeah.
I don't know the Bay Area well enough to remember that exactly.
All right. So let's roll some dice. Let's roll the D20 and see who's going to win the books.
Well, okay. So let's do Twitch first.
Okay.
Let's do the Twitch chat first.
Actually, if you just roll the D20, there's probably enough. I'll just count 1 to 10 on the Twitch and 11 to 20. Whatever. Yeah. All right. Just roll a number. Let's get a number and see who wins.
18.
18. Oh God, that's a big number. Let's have a look at my. Roll it again, please. It's a bigger number than that. Keep going. Let's get something small.
I actually rolled 18 again.
Oh my God, typical.
7.
7. All right, 7. Who's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7 is Christopher Weiss. Well done, Christopher. You've won yourself an Exphoria code. Send me a private message on Facebook, and we will get that code to you. And let's have another roll.
Yeah, all we need is, as I say, all we need is your email address. No, nothing else. Just give us your email address, and I'll get the publisher to send you a copy.
Okay.
All right, second copy. That is 12.
12. That is James Needham. James Needham, you've won yourself a book. Well done, my friend. Again, send me a PM with your email address, and we'll get you that code. And for everyone else who didn't win, there's a 30% off offer. We'll get you the details of that later on, as Anthony said. And yeah, and it's definitely worth getting, especially at 30% off. You can't really argue with that. Someone just told me this is a great show. It's going to evolve from a great show to a major show. All right. So I think that's enough. That's been like over 1.25 hours. That's a long talk, but yeah, that's what